Frank. He's an attorney and a professional genealogist specializing in birth family searches and cold case research for law enforcement. He has successfully reunited over 150 adoptees with their birth parents using commercial DNA testing. He's also been a huge supporter of Indiana Adoptee Network and attended and presented at all of our conferences. So we'd like to welcome at this time, Stephen Frank. Hey, Stephen.
Hi, Marcie. And let me say congratulations to you, Jennifer, Pam, and everyone on the successful national launch of National Association of Adoptees and Parents.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So are you going to need any screen sharing this evening?
Yeah, we could. I thought we could do some chatting. And then if we have some time later, I might, I did have one thing I thought might be fun to demo for everyone. It's a tool that's specifically designed for adoptees. I'll just tease it for that. It's a specific DNA tool for adoptees that we might want to show.
Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started then. If you want to tell everybody a little bit more about yourself, those that don't know you already, and how you got started and why you got started and what you can share with them this evening.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Frank. I'm an attorney and a professional genetic genealogist, which means I use DNA to help people solve their mysteries with their genealogy. That includes helping adoptees search for their birth parents. That has been a large part of my life for the last 5-6 years or so. I've helped about 200 adoptees, I think now, reconnect with their birth families, reunite. I've also helped people with other similar situations, people who don't know their father, foundlings, amerasians, the children of overseas GIs, with reconnecting with their birth families. And I've also helped law enforcement some. It's been, I also speak at a lot of different genealogy conferences and adoptee conferences on how to utilize commercial DNA testing in order to help uncover your family mysteries.
Okay, do you want to go ahead and does anybody have a question for Stephen to start off with? Go ahead, feel free to raise your virtual hand. Stephen, you want to share with us one of your toughest cases that you've ever had before?
Sure.
Or unique one?
So there's been a number that have been really difficult because there's so many different things that can happen when you're doing these. A lot of times we'll start and think we are going down one road and then it ends up going another way. There can be all sorts of little twists that happen with DNA cases. One that comes to mind was a case where the woman was a foundling, and we were looking at a particular family for her that was out of Terre Haute, Indiana. And we thought that was her family. We didn't know if it was her mother's or her father's family at first, but we knew that she was found, she was abandoned in a parking lot in Beech Grove, Indiana. And so we were trying to find a member of that family from Terre Haute that had some connection to Beech Grove, the Indianapolis area at the very least. And we found someone. We found someone who was a descendant of that family who lived just 2 blocks away from where she was abandoned in Beech Grove. And so we thought, that must be it. That must be her family. And we thought that must be her mother's family. But it turned out that was actually not. It was her father's family. It was one of the twists that came along because later on, after spending about 1.5 years trying to figure out who her mother was in that family, and he kept hitting dead ends and nobody was quite fitting, all of a sudden we logged into Ancestry one day and there was her mother. Her mother had done a DNA test. After 40 years, she shows up on there. She did a test that her granddaughter from her other child had given her for Christmas because she was a genealogist. And that's what you get genealogists for Christmas, are DNA tests. And so she shows up on there, which I'm still shocked that she didn't put 2 and 2 together, that if you're somebody who's abandoned a child, maybe you don't want to take a DNA test. But nonetheless, she did show up on there, and we were able to eventually reconnect with her. That was one of the more dramatic cases I've worked, because it was a lot of being very careful with the reconnection process there. There's a lot of trauma involved. It was a very unique situation, but we were able to successfully reunite. It just took a long time for everybody to get there. The adoptee I was helping, the foundling, had some expectations of, she was very hopeful and excited to reunite with her birth family. And obviously her mother was, well, honestly, just scared of going to prison for what she had done. But, that was not where we were coming from. And it took a long time to kind of work her to acceptance of where we were with this and, what her daughter was seeking from her. And I'm happy to say that eventually we were able to get there. It's an interesting process because, half of it is, the DNA is just half of the process. The other half is that reconnection process, that reuniting the family. And that can be more difficult in many cases than the DNA. It just depends. Some cases these days, a lot of people that I help, they've already got matches on there that are first cousins or a half aunt or uncle. And a match like that, it's not hard for you to get a good idea of who your birth parent might be. And so I don't necessarily have to do a lot in a lot of the cases I work these days for adoptees, more than just confirming, yes, what you're looking at looks correct. That match, my professional opinion, you are correct with what you're thinking, that is your birth parent. But then, the second half of that is locating them and trying to reconnect with them. And that honestly takes more of my time these days than doing the DNA searches.
Okay, let's see here.
I'd be interested.
Jennifer has a question.
I'd be interested, is there anybody, I'm assuming, has everybody here done a DNA test? Is there anybody who hasn't done a DNA test? When I give talks these days, for the most part, everybody's already done one. I'm curious if there's anybody who's still looking via DNA for reconnection with birth family out there right now.
Jennifer asked, what's your most interesting law enforcement case?
I can't talk too much about the cases. They are all of them to some extent, or one extent or another, they're all still ongoing. There aren't any that have been closed to the point where they're going to publicize them for a couple of different reasons. A few, they're pretty much done, but they still don't want to publicize them. None of them, they're all cases that involve unidentified human remains, DOE cases, not suspect cases. I have not worked those. And but there's still some possibilities of a case being involving a murder. You don't know really with an unidentified human remains case. Sometimes you can tell from the circumstances. There's some where the body was found in such a state or pieces that kind of tells you that some foul play occurred in them. There was one that came to mind that I worked on, was consulting with a TV show. And they had a case that they ended up unfortunately not being able to use because of the DNA, but it was a really interesting case. It was a case out, I believe, out of Oregon, where a head was delivered to a police station in, I believe, the 1970s. And then sometime later, like maybe 10 years later, the body was found that went with that head. It was left out, and it had apparently been like, or maybe it was the other way around. The head was then found 10 years later. Sorry, they found the body, and then 10 years later, the head, which had been preserved, like frozen, was delivered to the police station. So real serial killer stuff. That'd be great for a podcast. I'd love to listen to that podcast. But unfortunately, they were not able to extract DNA at the time. I'm hopeful that they'll try again and be able to do that. But the first couple tries, they were not able to get good DNA. That's a big problem with those sorts of cases. It's not as easy as just swabbing like you do for an ancestry DNA test, or actually that one's spit. So it's not as easy as that. You have to grind down bone and extract the DNA and put it through all these lab processes to get it suitable for these tests. And I'd say only about a fifth of those actually work, if even that. So you hear about all these successes, but there's 10 or 20 for each of those successes that didn't work at all, unfortunately. It's still very much a developing field on the law enforcement side. If you are on a commercial DNA website like Ancestry, I just think you should know that your DNA on Ancestry is not available for law enforcement. I always want to be clear about that. I use Ancestry for adoption cases. I don't use it for law enforcement cases. Those are only available if you're on the websites genmatch.com or genmatch.org for your for DNA, or for family tree DNA. Those are the only two websites that can be used for that purpose. So it's something I always get asked is like, can law enforcement look into that? If you're not on those two websites, you don't have to worry about it. But if you are interested in supporting that, helping identify, for example, DOE cases, I do suggest transferring over. Another case that I'm kind of ancillarily involved in is the Bear Brook case. This, I had my business partner worked on that case when it was first done. There was a podcast series on NPR called Bear Brook Murders that I would highly suggest listening to if you're interested in that sort of true crime DNA genealogy subject. And that one is still ongoing with trying to identify the very last victim of the Bear Brook murderer. And they just put out a press release yesterday that they're looking for additional people to transfer over to GetMatch and Family Tree DNA in order to try and find some descendants of certain families they think are related to this last victim so they can help identify her.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
You see it, Pam?
There was a question. Do you find people born out of the country?
Absolutely. Yeah, I work quite a bit with the Amerasian community, which, if you're not familiar with the term, refers to generally to Americans born overseas, a child of, usually a child of a service member born overseas in either Vietnam, Korea, or Japan, sometimes a couple other countries like the Philippines and Germany, I suppose. There's a large Amerasian community of Vietnamese immigrants that are attempting to help children of Vietnam veterans come over to the United States. There was an act passed by Congress in, I think, 1986 or so called the Amerasian Homecoming Act, which allows the children of Vietnamese veterans who were born in Vietnam, so they have an American father, but they were born there, to immigrate to the US, to get a visa and come to the US and bring their whole family over. And the vast majority of them took advantage of that in the early 90s and came over with their families. But there were some that were left who couldn't identify their father. They had to actually name the specific GI in order to take advantage of that law. And if they were orphans, they had no information on that. So there's still a few hundred, at least at this point, still in Vietnam who have a birthright to come to the US but aren't able to. And I work with a couple of nonprofits that we actually smuggle ancestry DNA kits into Vietnam because they're not allowed by the government there. The product is banned in Vietnam and not allowed in. And so we have to smuggle in ancestry DNA kits, test these Amerasians, smuggle it back out, and then get it to Ancestry, and then we work to identify their father. Those are very difficult cases because honestly, it's harder than most adoptee cases when it comes to the family reunion. I find most of the families are not as willing as in adoption cases to acknowledge truths. In adoptee cases, I saw a statistic that the number of families that just reject reunion, number of birth families that reject that is I saw a statistic that said 3%. Honestly, I would put a little higher, maybe closer to 10%. Depends on how you define birth family, because are you just saying parents, siblings, aunts and uncles? It can be kind of broad as to how high you define that, how broad you define that. But for the Amerasian cases, I'd say 2 to 3% are successful. Those in actually getting a reunion. Very few of them are willing to cooperate with us, which is unfortunate because all we need them to do is do a specific kind of DNA test that the embassy will accept, and that's it. And then that person gets to come to the US, the charity I work with funds them to come over and pays for everything. We don't need anything from the families, but you know, it's sad how little cooperation we get from families on that subject. We're also running into the fact that a lot of the veterans now are deceased. You know, the Vietnam generation is starting to get a little smaller, and we're running into less time when we have family we're able to test for them. So the clock's kind of running out on that, even more so for the Korean War children. And you know, we're trying to get as many of these done as we can, and hopefully get them the birthright that Congress gave them.
Okay.
Tina Brown had a question about, in your experience, is there a downside to submitting for DNA?
There's always the unexpected is always possible. I can think of a case where an adoptee I helped, she was born in New York, and she wanted to find out who her birth mother was. And we were working her case and having a lot of trouble identifying her birth mother and her birth father. We eventually identified her birth mother. It was very difficult in that case because her birth mother had given a fake name, had given birth at a Jewish mother's home in New York in the 1940s under a fake name. And it turned out she wasn't Jewish. She wasn't from New York. She was from Western Pennsylvania, and she was Slovakian. And so this was, you know, just really hard for us to figure out. Without DNA, it would have been impossible. We eventually figured out who she was. We couldn't find anything on the father because the father, as far as we could tell from the DNA, was a Mexican immigrant. And this would have been in the 1940s. So it would have been very, you know, not nearly as common, obviously, now as it would be now to have Mexican ancestry and be in Western Pennsylvania. And we only had distant matches for him. He was from somewhere in northwestern Mexico, you know, Pueblo. And so we kind of put his case aside. We thought, okay, well, we'll see if better matches come along. Well, one day she got 3 matches in a day. She called me up. She was so excited to have these 3 matches. And we look at them, and it was saying they were, you know, in a close family, close relative category. So we're just over the moon about this. And she was excited because she saw that they had some Mexican ancestry. And she thought this finally be on my dad's side. So she told me, go log into my ancestry, take a look at it. So I go look at it, and I see, yes, she does have these matches. They do have Mexican ancestry, but they also had Slovakian ancestry, like her mother's side. And then their other part was Jewish, like her husband's side. So I thought about it for a second, and I called her back and I said, you know, you have kids, right? You have a son, right? She said, yeah. I said, do you know if he was ever a sperm donor? And she said, oh, no, he wasn't. So she asked him, he said, well, he thought about it in college, but he didn't do it. I'm like, and then I went back and said, I think he did. And I think these are sperm donor conceived children of your son because they have all of your genealogy from both sides and your husband's from both sides, according to the ethnicity. And they match people from both sides. So, you know, these are your grandchildren. And she was a bit of denial about that. And she finally accepted it after I actually had to go and identify them for her to convince her. It turned out that the children had been adopted by a somewhat famous Hollywood producer. So I was able to identify them pretty easily because of that. But she was in denial for quite a bit about that. So it's, you know, you go looking to uncover family secrets, and you don't get to pick which secrets you find.
Oliver had a question. Has DNA genealogy influenced privacy laws?
You know, it's interesting. There have not been a lot of changes on privacy laws yet. This is something that is in the pipeline. We keep expecting there to be some changes. I think 3 or 4 states have put forward laws to try and restrict things. And so far, those restrictions have not gone into place. They were various levels of restrictions for each law that was proposed. But generally, it's been the law enforcement use of DNA that has led to these concerns and the possibility of passing some laws to restrict their use and the amount of information that can be shared, to try and put a little tighter guardrails around people's privacy with these websites. But it's honestly, it's a bit of the Wild West out there. There's not too much out there. There's 2 laws at the federal level that restrict how DNA can be used. There's the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA, and that prevents the government and a few specific cases from using, like an employer, from using your genetic information to discriminate against you. It also, I should mention, there's also under the ACA is the second law, there's a restriction that prevents genetic information from being used to deny you health coverage under the ACA. And that's part of the pre-existing condition restrictions. And notably, there is no restriction in there for life insurance. I found that out when I applied for a life insurance policy. And one of the questions, this is about 3 years ago, one of the questions on there was, have you taken a commercial DNA test? And if you wanted to get life insurance from that company, you had to provide them access to your DNA test so that they could check whatever they wanted on it, whatever, for any genetic markers that they wanted to check for on it. I found that quite shocking. And so, I wasn't about to do that, but that's something to keep in mind. There's not much out there restricting people from using this if they want to. Most of the companies, if you look at their privacy policies, they'll explicitly say who they share information with and who they do not share it with. Most of the companies do not share with law enforcement, as I mentioned. Only Family Tree DNA is one of the commercial providers, shares it with law enforcement, and also GEDmatch, which is sort of a third-party site run by this company called Forgen. And the rest of them are more restrictive. Now, with that said, they do still share information. 23andMe is notable for using their information to patent new drugs. They share their information with pharmaceutical companies. They have an agreement with one of them, I can't remember, it might be Merck, I'm not sure, one of the pharmaceutical giants to patent new drugs based on what they find in their database of DNA tests. So that's always something to keep in mind if you're not comfortable with your data being used like that.
Right.
Options to opt out on these websites too. Like I'm on 23andMe, but I'm opted out of all of their health studies.
That's always a fear, because when like 23andMe did, they barely touched on like the BRCA gene, that's scary for we as women to have some of those tests done and, have that possibly pre-existing or whatever. Lynn has a little bit of, I'm gonna let her speak on that. Lynn, you want to take yourself off mute? Yours is a little longer.
I regret that. Just kidding.
No, we won't.
Hi, Stephen. I don't know if you remember, I talked to you about my case at the IAN conference. Yeah. My father was a recent Peruvian immigrant. And you looked at all of my DNA and you just basically were like, you need to wait for a closer match, which is what everybody told me. And it finally happened January of 2020. I got a second to third cousin she was a Peruvian. And I'd already matched her daughter at 23 and I'd already built a tree. So I had to do a lot of investigative work because in my case, nobody had decent Peruvian trees. And there was no birth record for any of the men I thought could be him. Mm-hmm. So I ended up solving it by taking the surname and just sending it through Ancestry's yearbooks. And he popped up in a school where the rumor had it that he was attending there and met my mother at a party. And once I found him, and it was a very unusual surname, I contacted some cousins in Peru and just asked some questions. And they gave me a couple ancestors that I could look at, and then I was able to tie this guy into the tree of my cousin. So I had to kind of go through the back door because I never had any common ancestors.
Yeah, that's a great way to do things. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's a good lesson for people when you've got one of these really tough cases.
Also, she was a half relationship.
Information.
Yeah, she was a half relationship, which I'm part of a DNA interest group locally. And they had told some of the people there, some of them are really experienced. They said, you need to look at half. And it turned out to be the way I solved this because my cousin that I matched with, we shared a grandfather, but not a grandmother. So that was kind of the key, how we tied it into the tree. And it took several months, but after I got the DNA match to really put it all together, because there aren't a lot of indexed Peruvian records, at least not the ones I needed. So yeah, it was unique. Everybody asked for help in the genealogy community. Nobody had any experience with Peruvian records. So I was kind of being this trailblazer for this area of the world. So if you know anyone that has that circumstance, I'm happy to help.
No, yeah, you should write up something on that, because that's.
You think?
That is pretty unique, honestly.
Maybe publish.
I think you're the only case I've ever had that was Peruvian. But, those are some really good points. Some of the techniques you use are exactly the same as I use, especially for some of those hard cases. If you had a unique surname, that's that might be in there. That is always something to search. And looking through yearbooks, I've had cases where I did the same thing. I'm like, I'm at a brick wall. I'm just going to get every yearbook in Evansville and go through it. That's the way I try and solve things. I've got one right now. That's why I said Evansville. I've got one right now I'm doing that for. I'm just looking for some of the names that I've seen in my matches to see if they show up in high school year.
And I tell people, look for repeating surnames, get to know your surnames, because then when I saw that surname, I was like, aha, my two other of my matches have that in their tree. So it was like, ding, 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 this is him.
And you also used, some of the other circumstantial information, you use your age and the age of your match to kind of determine maybe this is a half relationship, because you can tell you're not going to be at, if you're at the same level, then maybe to make the math work for those centimorgans, that DNA, then it has to be a half relationship. Things like that can be helpful clues to kind of narrow down the number of possible relationships. I know a lot of people are always a little confused when they look at their matches and they see like the centimorgans, and it tells them it could be one of these relationships, and how do I determine exactly how I'm related to them? And it's through using circumstantial information like that to try and figure things out. What makes sense here? Does it make sense for this person that's the same age as me to be my great aunt? No. So
she's 86. And the weird thing is,
in that case, it would not have made sense for you to be a first cousin, for example. Then you would look at something like half great aunt.
Yeah. So the grandfather, he got married. He was born in the 1800s, and he got married to a second wife much, much later in life. So he had kids late in life, and my own biological father had kids in his 60s. So I have a sister who's a teenager, and I'm 55. So this is a trend in that family. Anyway, I just wanted to share that how I, figured it out. I had help, but.
Yeah.
Hey, Lenore, do you want to take yourself off of mute and ask Stephen the question about finding your birth father?
Hi. All right. I was born in Italy in 1966. I reunited with my birth mother in 1985. I found her through a Freedom of Information Act. There's a bunch of Italian adoptees. So this was like pre-internet. So you send a Freedom of Information Act. It used to be through INS. It's not called INS anymore. Anyway, you get into a queue, and they send you your records. And so this guy helped me find her. He was an Italian adoptee also, and it's like his goal is to reunite all of us with our families. So he said, if your file comes back with her maiden name on it, I'll be able to find her anywhere in Italy if she's alive. And he found her in a day. So it took me just like 4 months total. I sent him the information. He told me where to send it. That took a month. That's all. I had no idea it would have been that easy. So I reunited with her in Italy in 1995. And then I went back again in 2010 and I took my sons and husband, and I met a half brother and sister. But my birth mother in a different part of Italy, she had 10 children total. I'm the only one that was put up for adoption. So I'm number 6. She abandoned her first 5 children. She was pregnant with me. My records say that she had an affair with her husband's friend. And it sounds like that's the truth. But when I met her, she swears it was her husband, which I don't think is true. So I got a kit. So I've been trying for years to figure out. I got a kit. I had to order a kit from Germany and send it to my brother and sister. He took test and it says that he's my half brother. But it gets a little bit weird because my sister said that she did her kit, but there was a problem with it. So I don't even know if she has the same father as my brother. But it's possible that she could be a full sibling. That's what I want to find out. But there's like a problem with our kit. Like, but anyway, is that like something that you could help me with if I hired you? Or is that like impossible?
So is the problem just right now with her kit being a problem, or
no, just like I keep seeing it, like 23andMe constantly says you have new DNA relatives, but it's just they're like 5th and 6th cousins, maybe a 4th and 5th. It's just like all Greek to me. Like I don't even pay attention to it because it just seems like it's so complicated.
Right. Like, it is very complicated. The way to deal with it is to try and break it down into manageable bites. That is something I can help with. The ideal situation is when you have some closer matches. Have you done an ancestry test or just 23andMe?
Yeah, so my half brother did Ancestry also. But
Ancestry typically gives better matches right now. Its database is, at this point, it's almost the size of all the other databases combined. It's 16 million users in it. And Italy is well represented in it. What part, Southern Italy or Northern Italy?
Oh, geez. Well, my birth mother was from Northern Italy, but I was born in Southern Italy because she fled to Southern Italy, but it's Northern Italy.
they're both pretty well represented in there.
Okay.
And you can, one of the things I love about it is that even if you don't have close matches, because of all the trees on the ancestry, I can look on there and I can see quickly when I'm looking at somebody from Italy, I can see, okay, your family is from this village, because I'll see that all the trees have one particular village in them. Even if I'm not sure what that person's surname is because maybe they don't have the documents you were able to get, I can still tell, okay, your mother or father was from this particular village. That's very quick to see through DNA. To try and trace the trees a little more takes more work. For Italy, it often requires, there's a good amount online for Italy now. Records are being scanned by almost all of the European countries now. They're putting all their records on. I love that because it's making it a lot easier for me to trace. I love tracing my family back to as far as I can. And all these countries are putting them online. It makes it so much easier. But they're starting to put it online for Italy. You can get information for like local Italian parishes, which is where you want to look for like churches in the baptism records in order to trace family relationships, baptisms and marriages at local parishes. You can find that online pretty well, and you can write to the churches, just email them, and they provide the information, usually for free or for very little, from their local archives. It's, Italy is actually not, pretty good country for that. The one problem with Europe is when you want to start looking for living people. So that's where it gets difficult. And that's where like genealogy is not as helpful, because there's not as many people that have tested. There are some, but a lot, mostly what you're going to find on there when you're getting those 5 and 6 cousins, I bet you're going to see that a lot of them are Americans with Italian ancestry. Right. And your common ancestor is back in Italy, but they're not like contacting that person. That's not going to be too much help to tell you anything about your family, because they're distant and they don't, they're from Brooklyn. They don't know anything about Northern Italy. So they're not going to be able to say, oh, here's where your family lived in Turin or whatever. And so to find, the problem is there's not that many people that have tested in Europe. The percentage is so much lower in Europe than it is in the US, just because our countries, honestly, we're more genealogy obsessed than they are. And the other problem is that for a detective point of view, the problem is that they have much more robust privacy laws in Europe than we do. They have the GDPR, the law that got passed about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago now, that restricted online use of personal information. Websites have to provide you all these disclosures on how they use your information. And that had the effect of scrubbing European information out of a lot of public databases. So you can go on, for an American, if you want to find out something, if I want to find out, like, okay, let's say, I have somebody who's done an ancestry test and they have a first cousin, and they want to find out who that first cousin is so they can contact them. I can just go on a people search website, like one I like to use is benverified.com. I can just type that in and it tells me every contact information I want to know about them. Pretty much everything off their credit report is right there. And that's not available for Europe. You don't have any of that available because of GDPR. So I guess like kind of, assess your goals. Are you wanting to contact living family over there, or are you wanting to find out more about your history? Finding out the history is definitely something that's possible because they have great genealogy records. Finding the living people, that's where it starts to take a little more luck. You've got to find those close matches that maybe have a connection back to the old country, and can, find this in there, somebody over in Italy who is willing to work with you. That's ultimately what you need in order to kind of find the people there. Since you have the half siblings there, they're obviously the best bet for finding other relatives out there. But yeah, for going backwards, genealogy, these tests are great for that, and there's lots of genealogical resources out there for that too.
Thank you.
Kelly had a question. Kelly, do you want to take yourself off mute and ask about your public versus private profile question?
Sure. I was just so on Ancestry, there's only the public versus private profile option, as you know, and that makes it difficult for adoptees who don't want all of their information totally available for all of their bio relatives to see. But that's the way it is on Ancestry. So do you think that's ever going to change in your opinion? And how do you suggest adoptees navigate that situation if they want to contact certain bio relatives but don't want their profile to be public because there's a lot of bio relatives that they don't want that information out there for them to all of them to see, if that makes sense?
Great question. Yes, it does. So just to clarify for everyone else here, on Ancestry, when you set up your account, you do have to enter your information, and in order to see your other matches, you have to make it public to everyone else, or you don't see your other matches. You can't like participate in matching other people unless you are also visible to them. And so that's a double-edged sword. I mean, it's good because you get to see everybody, but bad because you can kind of have, I've had situations where I've had adoptees who took a test and they log in and they immediately see their birth father right there. And then he deletes his account because he sees them and he bails. And that's that can be a problem. It can adversely affect your search in a way. You can change your information after you register your test. Use a username instead of your name, because it wants to default to using your name when you register your test. But you can change it to a username and just make it whatever and change your name. And I highly suggest doing that. So that's one helpful thing you can do. Make it something really, wouldn't relate to you at all and would just look strange to them to notice it. So that any relatives looking at it would just say, that's odd, but not, put it together that maybe that it's a lost sibling. And then the other thing I would suggest is if you set up any trees, if you're making what people call a mirror tree or any sort of investigative tree, you make it private and unsearchable when you set it up. And that's something where after you create the tree, you have to go to the tree settings to set it as private and unsearchable. And then they won't be able to find any information on what you have in the tree part. So then all they can see for you is your public profile, which you can, after you set it up, you can go basically delete all the personal stuff you entered, and it'll just have a username, and that's all they can get from you. So it is possible to do that. And I would highly suggest everyone do that until they're ready to share on their terms. That's a good way to start because you don't really necessarily need to share more than you want to. Now, with that said, when you're contacting people, that's a whole different discussion, but it kind of dovetails with this. And you want to make sure you're sharing, but not sharing too much. And how much do you say to someone when you're contacting one of your relatives on there about your situation? I typically recommend not leading with being adopted and just talking about trying to reconnect with family. And then if you get a response, you can elaborate and give them more of the actual details. You first want to get them on the hook before you give them some more of your personal details, because otherwise they can be scared off. So if you're, I see a lot of people that put they're adopted and everything in their profiles. I don't know if that necessarily helps. My personal inclination is to keep it mysterious, keep as little information as you can available in order to not scare off people. I think would be the bigger concern for me. So.
Diego has a question. Diego, you want to take yourself off of mute, please?
Sure. Hey there. So my world is kind of around adoptees, and I'm in my master's program to become a therapist and work with adoptees in particular. So when it comes to search and reunions, the success rate of them for adoptees is relatively low. So my question to you is, what kind of advice do you give to adoptees that come to you for search, and what the reality is like for reconnecting with family? So you had mentioned before that, some surface stuff about the realities of finding out some things that you may not like or understand. But I'm talking more about the actual reunion process and, what kind of responsibility do you feel you have in kind of checking with an adoptee on what kind of personal growth work they've done through counseling or something of that sort before venturing on the path to reunion?
Right. That's an excellent point. And it's something that I try and be mindful of because I always have a long discussion with anyone when I'm first starting out helping them, trying to get a sense of where they're at. Because something you're hinting at there, I've had people I've talked to where I just realized from the discussions with them that they're emotionally not at the state where they're ready for a reconnection. That's happened in a few cases, and that's something where we can work through that. I can kind of recommend maybe they work through maybe talking through some counseling in order to get themselves into a situation where they're ready for acceptance and they resolve some of the issues around that they've been struggling with. And I also find you're saying the success rate is low. I I don't necessarily know if it's low. I don't quite look at it as such a binary success-fail situation, because there's a bit more gray area to this, especially when you're talking about in a lot of cases that I work on, the parents might be deceased. And so the family that you're reconnecting with isn't a direct parent. It might be a half sibling or an aunt or an uncle. And that kind of broadens, things. And what do you define as success too can be very broad spectrum for people. Some people are looking for a very close relationship. That can be very difficult to get. And I always tell people from the start, look, it's been, if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and you're looking to reconnect, it can be very difficult to work to get those relationships built. It's not an instant connection. It's something that has to be earned, and you really have to work towards to build those relationships, just like you would any relationship. And I try and manage everybody's expectations. I always say that this will sound kind of bad, but honestly, a lot of the adoptees I've helped, their current relationship with their birth families, in some cases, they're essentially just Facebook friends. They had their reunion, they traded some photos, and now they just say Merry Christmas on Facebook and things like that, and like each other's photos, and that's kind of their relationship they have. And some people that's not what they were looking for, and that could be depressing, and something that they might need some help dealing with. For other people, though, that's fine. But that's something I tell people. Just success can mean different things. You can connect with somebody, and that's the result of it. And you need to realize that it may, if you've got this glorious vision in your head, you might also need to be able to have the other visions and kind of find some balance in between, because relationships can change. Any relationship can change, and it might not necessarily work out the way they want. And that is something that continued counseling can definitely help with. I would highly recommend for anybody going through this process, because it's just such an emotional roller coaster by the very nature of it, that they do seek some professional help.
Thanks, Diego. Anybody else have another question?
Anne had a question.
I was just wondering, so my cousin's daughter was adopted from China in '99, and she's beginning to get interested, much to her mother's dismay because of me. So she's on my adopted side. So is there any test that they take in China that's like more common that we could get a hold of it for her?
There is a company called WeGene, like WEGENE. I think that's .com, okay. Maybe .org. I don't know how their tests work in China. I'm sure it's not a surprise if I tell you that China is pretty restrictive about these things. That's shock, they don't allow like ancestry kits in, who would have thought. But this WeGene company has a database that Westerners can use. You can upload an ancestry DNA kit to it. So it's like a bridge where that allows you to kind of get through the Chinese firewall and compare to people. I don't know how popular it is. I'm guessing it's pretty small and not a really big thing in China right now. But that would be the largest database of Chinese kits that is out there. That database, it's been around a while, but it's one of these things where everything's very Western centric for genealogy on like ancestry DNA. There's just nothing there. You won't find like any Chinese kits really. If you're finding it, it's very rare. The only times I've ever seen like Chinese matches where people are like third generation Californians, things like that. So places like that, WeGene, then there's the occasional kit on places like GEDmatch you can compare to that are done through anthropology studies, where like universities have gone around and distributed kits in order to get geographic profiles of different ethnicities throughout the world. So that's how they build those ethnicity results that you get on Ancestry 23andMe, is by sampling around the world. But yeah, WeGene's the only one I know of that is Chinese centric.
All right, thank you.
Lynn, do you have your hand up again?
Yeah, sorry. I thought I accidentally clicked clap. I'll save the clapping for the end. Stephen, what are some of your favorite DNA genealogy resources, like your top 3?
Yeah, great question. So I got to start with Ancestry just because it's, you know, it really is the end all be all for doing genealogy and with DNA. Their database is bigger than everyone else, and their tools are more accessible and more usable for the everyday user than other websites. They are also continuously adding good features. Their tools, for example, for estimating relationships have gotten really good in the last 2 years or so. If you're on your DNA matches on there, for example, one of my favorite things is you'll see like estimated relationship, first to second cousin. And if you click on that, you'll get a percentage. And that it'll say, this person is 99% likely to be one of the following relationships. It'll give you like down to like exact percentages of which category they fit into. And that can be really helpful for figuring out how you're related to people. It's much better than just the broad categories they used to have. You have to click on that part where it says estimated relationship and whatever range to get the more specific numbers. It's not presented to you immediately. The other feature they've added recently that's just fantastic is they've really beefed up their matching to trees. And they have a feature that is called Ancestry Through Lines. And what it does is it'll take, like if you have a tree and the other person has a tree, even if they don't connect immediately, it looks at all the other tree that has in its database and it figures out that, oh, your tree ends here, but that person's parents were these people, and that person's parents were these people, and it connects your 2 trees and tells you exactly how you're related to that person. It'll say, this person who shares this much DNA is your second cousin once removed, and kind of takes out some of the difficulties of, for example, knowing what a second cousin once removed is, because it does it for you, and it shows you on a graph, like, shows you a nice tree with you and your DNA match added to it. That right there is just one of the best features out there on the internet right now. The other websites I really like, I still like Prometheus. It's a website that I think is really good for adoptees to know about. This is a health website. It provides health information from your DNA kit. And that is one of the primary reasons a lot of adoptees take DNA kits, is to get that health information, that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get, the family medical history. So they can kind of find out what are they genetically predisposed to. The first adoptee I ever helped took a kit for that reason. And it was helpful. They learned they had a predisposition to colon cancer and went and got a colon cancer screening, and turned out they actually already had colon cancer. He already had colon cancer and caught it early enough to to really kind of alleviate it and extend his life considerably more than it would have had he waited another year and not caught it. So these, I absolutely, suggest everybody at least do some sort of health report. You get the one from 23andMe is great. If you didn't take 23andMe and used Ancestry, you can use that on Prometheus to get a health report very similar to what 23andMe provides. Prometheus.com is, I believe, $12 now for a report. So there's really nothing, especially if you compare it to like a 23andMe kit, which is 150, I think, or 200 for the when it's not on sale for the health version, or same for like the Ancestry's new health, which I do not recommend because it doesn't have as many features as 23andMe's. But the Prometheus one is a great option. even if you have a 23andMe kit, it's a great option because it gives you slightly more than 23andMe has, because 23andMe edits theirs down a little bit. There's a few things they think for legal liability reasons are a little too risky to tell you about if you had. There's certain diseases that, like Huntington's disease, they wouldn't want to tell you if they had that or not, and this would tell people about that. It's obviously very rare. There's another website. The one downside to Promethease is that it's a little hard to understand. Promethease gets around some of the FDA concerns that 23andMe ran into with medical advice by just presenting the straight facts to you. They just say, you have this gene was reported in this medical journal to have a 23% chance of increasing your risk for this disease in a population of this, that was tested by this university. And it doesn't really tell you about how all these different things interact to give you your overall profile, because you'll have good genes and bad genes for just about everything. So it almost requires professional interpretation, which you can get. You can take it to your family physician, or you could take it to a genetic counselor, which is a position that a lot of hospitals have these days, and typically is covered by health insurance. You can look it up and see if there's genetic counselors in network that you can take one of these reports to for them to interpret. If you don't want to go through that trouble and are willing to pay a little more, another website that I think provides a good health analysis is nebula.org. They actually have a free one that you can get if you go to their website. That it'll try and sell you things, but if you click right, you can get a free version that gives you about 30 health traits, which is pretty good for free. And then I think I don't remember how much it is. It's around $100, I think, to get their full report too, to get like everything, which is about the same as what 23andMe provides. And then finally, the other one I would recommend is if you're still searching and you're having trouble with figuring out and understanding like relationships on Ancestry, there's a website called DNA Painter, which has a tool on there that is specific for adoptees and people that are trying to find like an unknown parent. And that tool is very helpful. It's called What Are the Odds, or WADO, and it's on DNApainter.com. And it's a tool where you take your matches. If you have matches that you've identified on Ancestry, let's say you have a lot of people, you've realized all these people descend from some family, but you just don't understand how you might fit into their tree. How does that help you identify your birth parent? Well, you can take their tree and put all the matches in there. You start with their common ancestor, even if it's really far back, and then you add all the different matches, just the direct lines down to all your different matches. You just click a button on there and it will figure out, based on all the different matches you inputted, where you likely fit in the tree. And it'll even like create new branches, even if you don't have the branch, you didn't add the branch that you actually are on, it will figure that out. And it comes up with a list of probabilities for each match and where they fit in the tree. And it works really, really well. If you have enough data to go on, it's going to work better for closer matches. People that have, let's say, 200 centimorgans or more are really great for that, but maybe it's just too confusing to figure out how you fit in there. It can help you figure out where's the best exact spot that you might fit, and can be really great. I've solved a number of cases or confirmed a number of cases using that tool to figure out where somebody fits in a tree. And it's nice because that's the one use for it, is to kind of figure out where an adoptee would fit in the tree. It's nice that somebody has made a tool specific for that purpose, because that's there's a disproportionate amount of adoptees using DNA tests. So I'm glad somebody's thinking of them and making a tool specific for them.
Yeah, I just learned about that tool a couple days ago from Sharon Cummins, who's here in the room. She did a talk for the Ozark Genealogy Society. And so I've been helping someone with an unknown father case. So I went directly to it and input all of her information, but her highest match is about 156 centimorgans. So I'm still working on her ancestors, but I love the tool so far. I'm still a little bit lost on the hypothesis stage. like how to understand that.
Well, let me show it to everyone here really quickly. Let's see if I can get this to work here. I can give an example of it for everyone.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. Okay, so this is DNApainter.com. Does everybody see it now? Just to make sure. Just popped up something on me here. Okay, so there's a couple of different tools on there that we don't need to worry about now. Like the painting part is this chromosome maps over here. We don't have to worry about that on the right there. The only one we're interested in is the Watto tool. And Watto is just like you make a tree. You get this blank screen here, and you enter like your. First, I'm going to go off camera here for a sec. You enter like the person you're searching for, and what information you have on them. So this is a case that I was working on. I was trying to figure out what was Ellen Taylor's father's real name. She was born in 1919. This is someone's grandmother. And it starts with their most recent common ancestor here. And you enter that, but this assumes you already have some information from Ancestry, such as multiple matches that share a common ancestor, but you don't know how you are related to that family. So like in this case, I had that their common ancestor for them was a man named Thomas Asa Taylor, born in 1815, and his wife, Jemima Farrell. And then I just go here and I can add children, and I'll add I add a line for each child. If there's people descended from other ones, I would add them. So I can add the different people, and I can add their children under there. And then when I get to one of the matches, I can add the amount, the centimorgans. And that's that number you get from Ancestry or 23andMe that says how much DNA you share with someone else. So I can put in, the amount of DNA that I share with each person. Then I go and add more. And I can fill out the tree for everybody I know that's descended from that family. You get something like this. So same tree that I was just doing, but more filled up. So this is the family for this. I knew that Ellen Taylor, so this is not an adoptee case. This is somebody where her father was this man of mystery. We didn't know what his real name was. We knew the name he gave was William Taylor, but we didn't know if that was his actual real name. And we knew he was a lot older. He mysteriously moved to Oklahoma in 1910, married a girl, a shotgun wedding to a 15-year-old girl. He was somewhere in his 50s or 60s, we thought at the time. And he was not a good guy. He would disappear for long times. He always hinted that he had a second family. So the family really wanted to know who he was. We did a DNA test on his daughter to try and figure out where he came from. And these are some of the matches we found. These are all matches that she got. And you can see, I traced them back. I had to do a lot of work. 90% of what I do is doing other people's trees for them. I'm going through and just, extending their trees back. Most of these people had it back 1 or 2 generations. I'd have to push it back 3 or 4 generations in order to find the common ancestor. Now, that Ancestry Through Lines tool makes it a lot easier now than when I did it for this case. But eventually I ended up with this, and I input it into Watto here, and I ask it to give me hypotheses. I just click this button here, and it'll tell me where it thinks that Ellen fits in this tree. So I click this button, and you can see it's modified my tree. It's added extra people to it, and each of these hypotheses is a spot she could fit in the tree. And I can look at these, and it kind of looks like a bit of gibberish here, but if I click on where it says View Score view ranking of hypotheses here, it's going to show me a couple of them. And the higher the number on the score, the more likely it is. So it's saying, for example, that these top two here are 2 times as likely as the third option, 3 times as likely as the next one. You get the idea going on down. And so it's told me that, 14 or 20 are the most likely, which is, let's see, 20 is down here and 14 is here. So it's already narrowed it to like 2 places, which is David Taylor. That means that David Taylor is her father. It's saying she could be in place 14, which means her father's David Taylor. And her father is this David Taylor, would be the William Taylor. Or it could be William Taylor's another brother that just never showed up on any census, maybe. That's kind of what it's saying here. 20, being the child of 19, they could be somebody who just didn't show up on a census, which is totally possible. And especially considering how far back this was in time. And maybe, that's her father, but is still a child of Thomas and Jemima Taylor. Now, so that was what happened in this search. I ended up finding on this person a little bit more info. What I ended up doing was looking at that David Taylor. David Taylor died in South Carolina. And I contacted his family there, and I found a descendant of his family. Who was a genealogist, and I was able to test her. And actually, I should say, before she tested, she had an interesting story. But she said that, as far as she could tell, David Taylor wasn't buried there. He had a gravestone, but it was pretty clear from the cemetery records that he was never buried there. Just his wife was. And I was like, well, that's interesting. So what this is with her added. So you can see it's the same as the last one we had, but now I have a line under David Taylor because I've added the genealogist that I was able to contact who's descended from him. And this helped me, doing the Watto tree helped me target this. I knew that it was either under David or somebody unknown. So when I found that person under David, I could test against them to see if that was right. And I got this match back and it said 245. And I'm like, well, that's pretty similar to these others here. You can see it's not that far off from the other people around it there. Does that tell us anything? Honestly, just like kind of looking at this, it's hard to tell. It would take a lot of thought for me to figure out if that really tells us anything definitive. But this tool, I can just hit the button and it tells me, did that solve anything for us? So no, I hit the button and let's look at our ranking of hypotheses now. And now we have 1 at the top, which is 2 times more likely than the next one. When you're talking 2 times more likely, that's a lot. That's significant for this. It's statistically much more likely to be this top one than the second one. And that top one, as you can see, now says that Ellen is the child of David Taylor and grandchild of Thomas Asa Taylor. So it's eliminated this one that we were looking at before. Change the numbers on it here. Each time you click it, it's going to number them differently, but it has changed it so that being the child of David Taylor makes the most sense to us. And that's ultimately what we concluded was correct. David, it appeared, left his wife, abandoned his wife in South Carolina and moved to Oklahoma. He had 5 children in South Carolina, abandoned his wife there. She just, for keeping up appearances, she buried him there when he died. And then, he started another family somewhere. So, we were able to, after that, I ended up getting this woman to have her father test, which kind of helped just confirm it even more. But, it helped with kind of figuring out from, okay, you have all these matches, how do you figure out how you're related? Because if you look at these, you might be tempted, for example, if you look at the numbers on these, you'll see the top match, 530, is way up here at the top. But that's not where Ellen ended up being in the tree. That's why this is a very powerful tool. It tells you, that just going off this doesn't mean you're necessarily close to that person in the tree. You're closer to them because there's less generations between them, because that person is also older, as opposed to these younger folks over here that have more generations in between. But that can be kind of hard to understand And this tool can just kind of automatically do it for you and help you find the best spot and fit in the tree. It's only though as good as the data you give it. The more data you give it, the better. It does work better with matches that are higher. You notice the smallest one I used in there was 150. She did have matches that were less than that. Not all those are respective to the same family, but it's going to work better if you've got these matches that are like 200 or more. Is generally where it's going to work best. And you get that sort of that range between 200 and 500. It can be pretty ambiguous as to exactly how you might be related to them. It can help with those. So it's a really great tool for figuring out how an adoptee might be related to this family of matches that you've
Thank you
discovered.
so much. That was so helpful. I'm excited to work in that more.
Great. Okay, Stephen, if someone here that's with us this evening would like to reach out to you personally, what's the best way to contact you?
Probably by email. My email is stephen@geneticgenealogist.net. You can also just find me on Facebook through the NAAP links. You can find a link to me there directly. I don't mind if anybody reaches out to me and messages me on Facebook too. But yeah, I'm always happy to help. If anybody has any DNA issues that they'd like a consultation on, a second opinion on something, I'm always happy to assist any adoptees who need help. Well,
we really appreciate you. Like I said before, I know at our conferences, you've done an amazing job in supporting Indiana Adoptee Network for all of our conferences. And I know you've met a lot of our attendees. So we really appreciate your time this evening with us. With that, I'm going to go ahead and Jennifer, do you have our guest for next week? Okay, next week we will be interviewing Gabrielle Glazer. She's the New York Times bestselling author of American Baby. I'm really looking forward to this one. Not that I wasn't looking forward to you, Stephen. Okay.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, the book really looks great. And I know I've talked to a lot of people about this. So this really looks like we're going to have a really good evening. So I hope you'll mark your calendars and join us again next Friday when we can meet Gabrielle and learn more about her and her best-selling book. So that's all I have. Pam, Jennifer, do either one of you have anything in closing?
No, we're glad you were on. I learned something every time with you, listening to you, Stephen. The DNA just keeps expanding, and I know without it, I mean, I would have never found my birth father. So, I mean, it's a wonderful thing, and it's a complicated thing all in one. So, yeah, just if you're trying to find someone via that, just be patient because it does happen. I know Lynn, was in the same spot I was, and, we've all kind of been in that boat. Just, I know it's hard to wait, and, just be patient and if you can't get the answer, ask and ask and ask. I mean, fresh eyes are always a good thing, I think.
Yeah, Jen, you've used DNA for your search too, didn't you?
Yeah, I've helped a lot of adoptees.
Yeah.
Using their DNA, and when I get stuck, guess who I go to? Stephen.
Stephen, yeah. When I get stuck, I call Stephen. That should be a bumper sticker.
Just call Stephen.
Just call Stephen.
And everybody in the chat, as Stephen was mentioning websites,
yeah,
did post the links in there if you want to grab those before you leave the room. Those are all in there. And I know we had a question about downloading and uploading your DNA. I did post the link to our new website, but if you go to naapunited.org and you go to resources, and then you have a choice to click on the little adoptee section, and you scroll down, you'll see everything about DNA, and there's instructions on, depending on which kind of test you took, how do you download and upload, and where all the places are that you can put your DNA. And now we have WeGen to add to it. I didn't know about WeGen, so. Anyway.
Yeah, I didn't know that one either.
Okay, everybody. Well, that's it from me. We really, again, we appreciate everybody. Yeah, I see the applause out there. Thank you very much. Or Stephen. Yeah, Stephen. Okay, so
Thank you.
we appreciate you and everybody that came, that's on this evening. Thanks for coming again, and we hope to see you back next weekend.
Yeah.
Don't forget the 26th with David Bowl.
That's right.
If you would like to participate in the addiction and recovery support group. And then we definitely have the Rich Erlob's forum is this week. And I think we've also shared that on the chat bar, but feel free to reach out to us.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.